Hey Lucas, how's it going?
It is going well. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming back on the show.
My pleasure.
It's funny because I was just talking to Josh and I'm like, man, there's been so much going on with all these associations, unions, blah, blah, blah. We need Lucas to kind of just come down, back on the show and clarify and demystify everything that's been going on these last couple of weeks. So we're excited to have you back.
Hopefully I can help.
Okay. Well, yeah, so, I mean, there's been a lot of new developments over the last couple of weeks between, Leslie came on my show 2 weeks ago. She said, Kayla, I got to tell you something. I'm like, what is that, Leslie? And she was like, I basically have left the PFA. And I'm like, no, you didn't leave the PFA. And she's like, yeah, I did, because, there's a lot of things going on, and had a lot of strong accusations against Jeff Boris, talking about things where he basically gave information out that wasn't supposed to be given out, made a secret agent board, or I don't know if it was secret or not, but so we have Jeff on last week. We're like, Jeff, okay, tell us what's been going on. Leslie just said she's not on the PFA anymore, and then we learned from him, but we also learned from you that you're no longer with the PFA. So catch us up. What's been going on?
Yeah, sure. So, I think the last time I talked to you, we were really focusing on placing an interim executive board into existence for the PFA, and we had actually made quite a bit of progress on that front.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was an unfortunate information leak where names that we had been considering to be included on the board were published in a MMA news media outlet. And then, to my knowledge, that information had only been shared between myself, Leslie, Jeff, and maybe administrative staff of PFA.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Leslie reached out to Jeff, he explained to her that he had been working on creating this board of agents, and that he had shared some of the information or all of the information with these other individuals. But to this day, I mean, I still don't know who gave the information to the press. But it was unfortunate that it got leaked because Leslie had promised confidentiality to some of the fighters she had been talking to. So it was definitely a major step back. And once Leslie decided to step away, I had been going it over in my head, the decision to step away as well, because it seemed that Jeff's vision of unionism and mine differed in terms of he was focusing on creating this board of agents at a time when I thought really all of the efforts should have been focused on creating this interim executive board of fighters, and a board of agents is something that could come along after you were certified in a mature union.
Well, and what does the role of the agents play? I'm still not clear on what role they would have played.
Well, in most other of the major sports unions, they have a board of agents as almost as a means to regulate that profession, so to speak. So they will create a board of agents. I guess you could call them consultants or advisors, and really their role is to kind of self-regulate their own profession, so that you can keep the nefarious agents or less than reputable managers out of the industry. And so they do play a useful role in that capacity in the other unions. But I really felt like if you were doing this campaign from the ground up, the first and foremost thing you have to put into place is an interim executive board of fighters for a couple reasons. One, legally, as a union, you have to put together a constitution and bylaws, and that constitution and bylaws really needs to be implemented and approved by fighters.
Mm-hmm.
So legally, that was important. And then just from a backing standpoint, I thought it was very important to get fighters in place, making decisions, making policy choices, so that other fighters, when they looked at PFA, wouldn't say, oh, this is Jeff Boris and Lucas Middlebrook running this show, and it's not about the fighters. I wanted the exact opposite, was that the fighters, the interim executive board, they could choose any professionals they wanted to lead their union, just like or to assist their union, just like any other union does.
Right. And it sounded like Jeff's biggest criticism of Leslie and potentially your philosophy with the how you wanted to go about the creating the union. He was like, this is my profession. I understand how this works, and Leslie's a fighter, and she should stay fighting. And I, in a broader theory aspect of that, I understand maybe where he's coming from, but I think when it comes to starting, like you said, it's a startup union, and so for a very, I don't know what the word is, but it's a the MMA community is not suspicious, but sensitive to who they kind of allow to come in and start making decisions for them, especially since they're already in a very vulnerable position. Um, Especially as being deemed independent contractors with the UFC, um, it didn't seem like he was really open to getting any other feedback from other people. He said he pretty much made the decision to make an agent board and didn't see the need to really get input from anyone else.
Yeah, and that's where we differ on our philosophies, because I've served as counsel to a number of startup unions who really did start from the ground up, and yes, they don't have, those individuals don't necessarily have the experience with the National Labor Relations Act or the unionizing process as I may have, given that I've been doing this for a while. But that still that's why they hire professionals such as attorneys, and once you get into the bargaining, you may hire a labor economist. But what I was stressing to Leslie over and over is, if you're going to run a democratic union, those decisions need to be made by the people who are going to be affected by the collective bargaining agreement. So the executive board or an interim board was an important piece, so that you could say, if they didn't like me or if they didn't like Jeff, then they could tell me or Jeff to step away, and they could hire whatever labor lawyer or another individual that they want. It's just important that the people whose lives are going to be affected by a potential CBA or the union in general need to be the ones making the decisions, but they can make those decisions with advice of counsel or input from other sources, but they still should be the ones making the ultimate decisions.
Sure. And from as far as you know, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but as far as you know, do you feel like Jeff was open to having that interim executive board with the fighters so that they could kind of look into the PFA as far as it had been built and decide from moving forward if they wanted to have you and Jeff and the rest of the PFA staff to continue moving forward with them?
Yes, I believe he was open, and he certainly was open to the concept of an interim executive board being formed. He was also at the same time working on a board of agents, which I thought could have come later down the road.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, yeah, and there's a lot going on, even just with the announcement with the MMAAA. I'm not quite sure what they're going to call themselves yet, but or their acronym. But what are your thoughts?
Sorry to interrupt, but that's a really interesting, because I've heard that too, and some people say Ma, and I actually had a conversation with Leslie many weeks ago, and I said, and this is actually a true story. I said it's always important when you're union organizing, that when you come up with your name, you make sure that it's got a palatable acronym associated to it. And it was just interesting to see this organization come out, and it wasn't the best acronym out there, but
right.
I'm sure they'll come up with something.
Right. I don't know, double M, triple A. So who knows? But yeah, with the announcement, did you know that this was a pending announcement? Was it a surprise to you? Did you know anything about it?
It was a surprise to me when it came out last week. I had heard rumblings earlier back in shortly before the PFA announced that there was going to be another entity potentially associated with CAA that may be announcing some sort of unionizing or association effort, but that was back in the summer, and I hadn't heard anything since then. So in terms of the timing, it was a little bit of a surprise, and I certainly wasn't involved in any of the decisions with that association, or nor did anyone reach out to me.
Sure. And so when they made their announcement last week, they have fighters like George St. Pierre, Cain Velasquez, Donald Cerrone, Tim. Hello, I can't even think of his name. Hello.
Kennedy.
Kennedy, thank you. Kennedy, and who's the last one that they had on there? They had another fighter, I think. And then you have Bjorn Rebney. And, you know, they come and they make this, they have a pretty celebratory introduction to the, you know, the circus of unionizing the UFC. And so what were your thoughts? What were your initial thoughts by the press conference? Did you hear the press conference? What were your thoughts?
Sure. I listened into maybe 35, 40 minutes of the beginning of the introductory statements and some of the press's questions. And I guess my reactions were twofold. One, it was very nice to see a number of fighters and well-known fighters come together and put their names out in support of an association such as that. So I was happy to see that because you know, not many fighters want to put their names out there.
Mm-hmm.
But then, aside from that show of solidarity, which I thought was wonderful, I had a lot of questions in terms of the legal framework that this association was pursuing, because it seemed like, at least initially, they didn't have plans to unionize, and that they were going to operate as a trade association. However, then Bjorn made comments referencing a collective bargaining agreement. They made comments referencing a potential work stoppage. But that seemed to be at odds with the statement that, at least initially, they weren't going to unionize. So that raised a number of legal questions in my mind as to how exactly they were going to achieve the goals that they set forth.
Right. Yeah, that was my biggest concern as well. I was thinking of the different interviews that you've given in the past and a lot of information I've read online, which once you do not claim or say that you are pursuing to become a union, you're not protected as the fighters in the same way in which, you know, fighters who would be pursuing to be a part of a union would be. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I guess the first one is if you're an active individual active in organizing a union on your property and you're an employee of the entity that you're seeking to unionize, then you have the protection of the National Labor Relations Act, specifically Section 8A3 of that act, which makes it illegal for an employer to discriminate or retaliate against an individual for their lawful activity on behalf of the union. And if you feel like you've been retaliated against, then you can file what's called an 8A3 charge with the National Labor Relations Board, and the NLRB will then investigate that charge, and if they find that there's merit, the NLRB will actually file a complaint against the employer and prosecute that complaint. And the reason that that's such a valuable tool is because most startup unions don't have a lot of money. And what's nice about that is if the NLRB finds there's merit, they act as a prosecutor. And so it's not a very cost-intensive process for the individual who's filing the complaint. And so that offers nice protection from the ground up. And I remember when you and I spoke last time, an individual had aired his grievances over being fired from a TV deal because he was wearing something other than Reebok.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, my advice would be if you're going to complain about the terms and conditions of employment, do so in the context of I'm supporting this union drive, because then retaliation would be illegal under 8A3 of the NLRA. So that jumped out at me, that if they were saying we're not seeking to become a union, at least initially, have they now removed that important piece of federal protection from these fighters who've attached their names to it?
Right. And it sounded like their protection that they are kind of banking off of is just the gravitas of the fighters that are supporting this movement. TJ Dillashaw is the other fighter I was thinking of earlier. But it sounds like they're kind of using the name and the brand, the collective brand of these fighters as they've announced so far, to kind of be their shield against too much negative, backflack from the UFC. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, and that certainly may have some value in terms of protecting the fighters. I guess the question is when when you have individuals associated who end up coming out in support that aren't as high name or of potential, let's say, value that the UFC sees them as value, then will the UFC take the same approach with those fighters? And that's why it's, at least to me, it's important to have the backup or even the frontline defense of a federal law which has been around for many decades.
Right, right. And so now that you're not necessarily associated or affiliated with any of the groups, or are you? Are you just kind of an independent guy who's just willing to be used and however he can be used with the fighters?
Yeah, I'm not affiliated with any of the groups that are out there. I still keep in contact with Leslie and some other fighters, in the UFC, and I've told Leslie that if she has any concepts or ideas of potentially going the union route at some point, then I'd be happy to help her out. But aside from that, I'm just a practicing labor lawyer with other clients.
Right. And I think, Lucas, that's what a lot of the MMA actually kind of likes about you in particular. I think that you in a lot of ways don't have the affiliations with with MMA as maybe a Bjorn Revny does. You might not have like the name dropping in terms of like Barry Bonds with Jeff Boris and all those different things. But I think that there is a sincerity, at least from what I've seen, from you, and even I've seen it throughout Twitter. Many people have said, you, Lucas, should go ahead and maybe not. I don't know if it's make up your own organization, but definitely it seems like you've maybe gained the trust of a lot of fighters and of a lot of the MMA community in terms of just even communicating truthfully what it is from a legal standpoint, from even just a philosophical standpoint. So where do you go from here? What's your next move? Are you pursuing an opportunity? Because you've worked so hard. It would kind of be a shame for you to just kind of step away.
Yeah, I did put in a lot of time and effort because I believed that was the appropriate vehicle for the fighters to better their careers and their profession, and I kind of bring that unionism ideology just because of the field that I work in, that I've done labor law for my entire career, but I'm disappointed in that PFA up to this point didn't follow the path that I hoped it would. But with that said, it's hard when people say exactly the same things that you said on Twitter, Lucas. You should head up a movement. You should start your own. And my response to that is it can't be a labor lawyer or an agent that spearhead. You need the backing of the employees who are going to be affected, even if it's behind the scenes. And so typically what happens is, I'll get a call from a group of individuals who would like to unionize, and then you assist them. And so it's not the other way around in terms of how these things come together successfully.
Right.
If you're going to be successful, it's got to be from the ground up, and it's got to be grassroots. And I thought we were getting there with PFA in terms of the interim executive board, but then we took a few steps back. So at least for me, I'll remain in the community, in the MMA community, as much as I can, obviously, and I think people know how to get in touch with me and contact me if they have questions. And that goes to the other point, really, is that it is so important to educate the individuals, and in this instance, the fighters, as to the process of unionizing, the process of collective bargaining, the chances of success, the legal roadblocks you may face, and then with respect to an association that's not unionizing, explaining what they can and cannot do in terms of bargaining. So, for instance, if this new organization is not a union, then the UFC has no legal obligation to sit down at a bargaining table with them, none whatsoever. And if they do become a union, there's another federal law, the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act, the LMRDA, which restricts in some fashion the finances that can come in and out of a labor union in this country. And labor unions actually have to file financial reports every year with the Department of Labor, essentially opening their books. And so I saw it's been mentioned, but it's been denied that there's a CAA involvement or backing with this new organization, and that could be problematic if they were a union, because there are restrictions on where money can come in from and where it can go.
Yeah, that was definitely an interesting sticking point from the a takeaway from the press conference or the phone conference, because I think people are, you said grassroots. When you have financial backers, most of the time that's not necessarily grassroots. That's quite corporate, actually. And so, are there any legal implications even for having that financial backing?
Yeah, and that, well, there is if you're a union. So there are restrictions, like I said, on where the money can come in and come out. So typically the way it works is either you have an established union, such as, I always use the Teamsters because they're well known. You have the Teamsters, who are a very large union in this country and obviously have some deep pockets. Now, the Teamsters International, which would be the parent of all the Teamster locals, that they could use their treasury funds to start an organizing drive, which they typically will do at different properties. That's okay. And then you could also have the members who are potentially trying to form the union through donations of their own, put those into a treasury, and that could be your money to start the organizing drive, to file with the NLRB. And it starts getting very dicey when you're getting third-party money, especially from potential corporate donors, funneled into a labor union, and that's when you may very well run afoul of the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act. So I don't know if that led its way into the decision for this organization to be run initially as a trade association. I don't know one way or the other, but in terms of legal red flags that popped up for me, that was one of them.
Gotcha. And I know you mentioned there are just so many things that you could mention about just everything that's been going on with these associations, unions. What are some of those things that you're like, okay, let me just get this off my chest?
Well, there seems to be, PFA seemed to be the lone horse in the race that was focused on going the union route and collective bargaining, and that's why I was associated, because I felt like that was the best route to achieve bettering of the profession for the fighters, because I did strongly believe that once the NLRB examined the evidence, they would make the determination that these fighters are certainly not independent contractors, that they are in fact employees, and so that was important to me. And with respect to the MMAFA, who's been around for a while and has done some good work, they do not want to go the union route, and instead they are focused on lobbying for expansion of the ALI Act to MMA. And I think that those are valiant lobbying efforts. I'm not sure, especially given the change in presidency beginning in January, that may become a reality, knowing that veto stamp will be ever present on Mr. Trump's desk. So that would concern me from their front, potentially. And the second is, I know that the MMAFA, or at least some of the individuals involved, are engaged in the Sherman antitrust lawsuit against the UFC, and if they were successful in that lawsuit, it could provide some monetary damages for past wrongs and potential injunctive relief. The extent of that injunctive relief, meaning the court's telling the UFC what they can and cannot do if they're found to be a monopoly, it could be helpful, but what it doesn't solve, and this is what I was concerned with, is the bigger issue of other terms and conditions of employment, comprehensive health care, a retirement plan, having a say in the drug testing program, which would be a mandatory subject of bargaining, putting together a grievance procedure, everything that's covered by your typical collective bargaining agreement. Those don't get resolved through an antitrust lawsuit. So again, that just brought me back to, I thought the best path was through the union effort. And then the new association, I just think there's so many unknowns. At least at this point, are they going to go the union route? Are they not? Are they going to potentially take a play from the NFL players and certify and then decertify if bargaining's not working and sue the UFC for antitrust, only then to recertify again once you get a collective bargaining agreement? These are all things that I don't know yet. And I guess the other thing that concerned me was when Bjorn talked about potentially striking.
Yeah.
That was another red flag, because if you're not a certified union and therefore subject to what they call the non-statutory labor exemption from Sherman antitrust laws, then if you engage in a collective work stoppage and withhold services, the association and potentially the members could be sued for violating the exact same act that the MMAFA is currently suing the UFC over, which is the Sherman Antitrust Act.
Right.
Only if you're a union, a certified union, can you then fall into that exemption and be allowed to strike. So that could be dangerous if it's found that they're collectively withholding services and they're not a certified labor organization. So that was another red flag that jumped out at me.
Yeah, and one of the things that kind of stuck out to me for the MMAAA is that with them going the route of with becoming an association versus a union, they made a very strong stance. We're not a union. We're not a union. And the thing with that, one, the fighters potentially could, won't be protected under the different acts that you were talking about before. But then also is that it sounds kind of like they are looking to receive damages in lost wages over the years. And it kind of just sounded like they were looking to kind of make a quick fix for the current fighters, because I think as Leslie was on the show a couple weeks ago, she mentioned, she was like, you know what, as I learn more and more about what it means to create a union, I'm understanding that it might take 5 to 10 years for us to become an actual union and for us to actually get some collective bargaining going on. And so it sounds like maybe, obviously the MMAAA is aware of those things as well, and those fighters, and maybe the direction that they're thinking of going is the faster route, which I'm not convinced that is going to be the most holistic, like we said before, with healthcare, with all the different things going on. Do you think that the TV deal coming up is potentially a reason why in which they're going this route? Because the TV deal is up in July of 2018?
Right. Yeah, it could be, because I've seen that they're looking for a multi-platform deal, and we could be talking, hundreds of millions of dollars, certainly, or more, in terms of a new TV deal. And maybe that's why they've chosen the route. But what I'm still at a loss to understand is how are you going to exact any leverage on the UFC to have them bargain with you over anything? I mean, unless you file some sort of litigation and you can enter into a settlement of that, or you use the leverage of the legal obligation to bargain in good faith with a union, I just don't see, no matter how big the names are associated with it, a new association walking to the front door of the UFC offices asking for millions and millions of dollars in back pay and part of the new TV deal revenue sharing, if the UFC has no legal obligation to do so. Employers just don't hand out money if they're not required to do so in one context or the other. So it could be they have a very elaborate and sophisticated plan that just hasn't been explained to the public, and if so, I would really look forward to seeing it unfold, because I've been running this through my mind over and over, and I don't see the path without some sort of external leverage.
Sure. And you remember they said that the UFC is going to come to them, so they don't really have any plans to go to the UFC, which is, I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out. But yeah, I think, you make a lot of good points, a lot of things for the UFC fighters to pay attention to. And, one thing that we did for the fighters and for the MMA community was we made a chart just describing the differences and the similarities and differences between the 3 different organizations. Areas such as, let me pull it up on my computer. Second. I had it here. Now lost it. Here it is. So yeah, so just the MMAFA, the PFA, and the MMAAA, talking about their goals, whether they intend on becoming a union or not, whether they're thinking of striking or not, and the financing that is going to go behind or involved with each of these organizations. And so we're going to make sure we put that out on the Twitter and Facebook, and we want to thank Lucas so much for even just, I mean, again, he's not affiliated with any of these organizations, and yet it's his passion, as you can see, to just educate. And as fighters, I hope that you guys understand that educating yourselves is the most powerful thing that you can do when combating these larger entities that are WME-IMG / the UFC. And when you have other people who are coming in to try to help you, you need to even be educated with those folks and understanding their backgrounds, what their motives are, what their intentions are. So, Lucas, are there any final parting thoughts that you have?
Yeah, no, I would just echo exactly what you just said. It is so important to educate so that you can make informed decisions on any of these entities that you are considering as a fighter, putting your support behind. I had one phone call with a fighter who another individual had said, you don't want to go the union route because the only leverage you'll have is to strike. And if the strike goes sour, you'll be out of a job. And I said, well, that's not your only leverage. In fact, a strike comes at the very end of the collective bargaining process when you've reached an impasse and you're not getting a deal done. I said, but there's all sorts of leverage that is built into the National Labor Relations Act throughout the collective bargaining process. Namely, the employer has an obligation to what they call bargain in good faith, and that's just not a term of art. That's actually a very legally loaded term, and so there's all these levers you can pull during the bargaining process based upon that to create outside leverage and try to force the parties closer to a deal. So, and once the fighter understood, that and the misinformation that you're only going to be able to strike and then you could be without a job, they understood the process better and they could make a better decision. So it's just a long way of saying you have to understand, you have to educate, and that is so typical in any unionizing drive because a large percentage of this country have never been in a union, and so they don't understand the process and the protections that it could offer.
Right, and their managers probably haven't been a part of a union group either, and so they're probably learning a lot themselves. So,
right.
Well, thank you so much, Lucas. Lucas, what's your Twitter handle?
It's at LKMiddleB.
Okay, so if you guys want to continue following Lucas, please, I advise you go over there and watch, and see what Lucas is talking about. He's constantly giving out such rich information, and it's so relevant to what's going on in the sport of MMA. Lucas, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye. In my opinion, it seems like Lucas was really a guy who just really wanted to help, and still wants to, and that's why he's helped me to create this chart, which you guys will see coming up on my Twitter at Girl Fight Talk page, and then also my Facebook page as well. And we'll put it up on the website as well. So just some information for you guys to review, to look over. I should actually put Lucas's number on it so that if you have questions, if you want to contact him, he's very open. He's a guy who just he really wants people to come and ask him questions because he sees that this is a huge turning point for the sport of MMA and specifically for the UFC. But yeah, get smart. Don't be dumb. Don't be DUM dumb. It's funny because there's so much going on between Trump, President elect Donald J. Trump. I still get that's not serious to me. Oh my gosh. But between Trump and between a lot of the other things going on in the world, it's just like, man, if you have someone, I've learned. I'm 23, and I think I've learned something in my 23 years of life, if you can imagine. That education is probably one of the most important things that you can have. When you allow someone else to make, whether or not you believe or trust that they're making informed decisions for you or not, it's kind of a scary thing. You're being led by someone else who you don't know, potentially. You don't know what their intentions are, what their motivations are, and it's just not a road that I personally would want to go down. If I were a fighter, I'd be trying to read up and learn as much as possible, and getting the consulting from as many lawyers as much as possible. And then I think also just looking at the, you look at the CAA, this group, right? Like how many of them? 4 out of the 5 guys represented by this fighters board are CAA guys. And Bjorn, it was funny the way he talked about the way he talked about CAA being like, backing these guys. He was like, no, this isn't a CAA union, right? But CAA is definitely supporting their guys. And I'm like, oh, so they're supporting 80% of the union, because if there's 4 guys represented out of 5 of CAA represented guys, that's 80%. So let's just call it what it is, Bjorn. Sorry, not Born. And so when we're talking about a CAA group of guys who are, in a union they're not a union, or an organization that's combating against the UFC, which is now represented by their rival entertainment firm, WME-IMG. What are we supposed to think? That no one has a dog in the fight? Of course they do. Of course they do. Excuse me. So yeah, and then to have them, I didn't even know that it was CAA that was financially backing these guys. If that's the case, then there's definitely a dog in the fight. How can you ignore that? That is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And then on top of that, just as a fighter, you think of like all of the fighters who are or who are not represented by either party, or even by the ones who are, CAA or WME. You look and you're like, well, wait, how did they decide which direction we're going in? It's just nowhere did they say, yeah, we're open to having other fighters join this union, or these efforts. We're the only ones who so far have, are willing to publicly announce ourselves as being support of this association. So, we're going to take it as far as we can and then see what we can do moving forward. I think even just within that group, I think in terms of, all those guys are great fighters, but let's be honest, there are certain characteristics and qualities that are needed in order to be able to organize your thoughts, be able to speak in a professional manner, be able to rally the troops, so to speak. And I think that George St. Pierre, Tim Kennedy is definitely one of those guys. But let's be honest, the rest of the guys, they're great big names. They're great big names. I would have them as supporters, just to use the name. But in terms of actually using, like, what else? This is not meant to be offensive, but what else do they really have to offer? Like, I'm not so sure that these are the guys. Yeah, Cain Velasquez is like really, and actually kind of shy. TJ Dillashaw, who I think I just look at him when he's under pressure and how he responded with Dominic Cruz that fight, and how he kind of just shut down because he was uncomfortable, or he was shy, or not shy, but didn't know how to respond. You need a quick-witted dude, and that's why Bjorn Rebney was able to weasel his way back into this thing, because he's a quick-witted, sharp-tongued, sharp-minded kind of guy. And you need those kinds of guys, but in the nicer sense, not in necessarily with the history that he's had with abusing fighters and contracts and all those different things. So there's still so much more. 2017 is going to be a year where, we're going to see, the race has started. We've seen the different horses, and we've got three horses in the race so far. Hopefully there are no more that join this race, because it's going to get too much. It's going to become too much. And it's time, like I said in the last episode, we need to get these fighters on the same page so that they can move forward as one entity. Otherwise, they will not have the power. And the UFC is going to divide and conquer, right? He's going to play the different groups against each other. And that's smart. Again, from the UFC standpoint, they see, oh, there's all these different groups. Okay, well, we'll kind of do a little bit for this group over here, but then we'll kind of do a little bit for this group over there. And they're going to play the different groups against each other. That's what they would do, and I bet that's probably, I wouldn't be surprised if they've been doing that a little bit. But off of, I know I'm kind of tired of the whole union thing for a little bit. It's a new year, it's December. And so, oh, I was going to do a little like intro for you guys. Like, so it's going to be, we have 4 weeks, 4 Mondays, I think. Is that right? 4 Mondays leading up to Christmas, or I don't know what holiday you guys celebrate, but I celebrate Christmas. Let's see. It's the 5th. Oh, come on. It's technology. When it works, it works. When it doesn't, it's the 5th. It's the 12th, the 19th. Oh, man. There's 3 Mondays to Christmas because Christmas is on a Sunday. So I was going to start singing the 12 days of Christmas, but I might save that for next week. You guys tell me what your favorite Christmas songs are, and I may or may not cover them on the show, right? If you want me to cover a Christmas song on the show, you guys can hit me up on Twitter, let me know, and maybe we'll put it to a vote if you guys so, want to hear me sing. Which I can actually sing. I don't know if you guys know that. I just don't like to sing in front of you guys because I don't want anybody judging me, but I can't sing actually. So if you guys want to hear that, go ahead and tweet and subscribe on YouTube. You guys don't miss a show. Let me just say, it is a struggle. It is the hustle of a lifetime to get subscribers on YouTube or to any like social media. For all of you out there who do it well, congrats to you because you've learned how to like hack the system. I'm still figuring it out. So if you want to give me a pity, subscribe or a pity follow on Twitter, I won't be upset. I take everything that comes my way with like as a blessing. So we love you guys. Have a great, it's December. Can you believe it? Enjoy your time with your family. Enjoy your time with your friends. This is the time of the year where you get to reflect on the year. Think about all the things that have come your way, the blessings that you've had, and reflect. And then obviously in a couple of weeks, we're going to think about what's coming up in the year 2017. So stay warm this winter, guys. It's been pretty warm actually in Denver, so we need the snow to come back. But we'll see you guys next week. Bye.